Good morning, everybody. We're on to lecture 2, and this is all about the entrepreneurial mindset. And so first, just to introduce that concept, essentially what we're going to look at is the way that an entrepreneur looks at the world. Are they optimistic? Are they pessimistic? Are they something in between? Can they see opportunities? Do they recognize opportunities? And the reason we want to touch on this in the beginning of this class is because the mindset an entrepreneur has is going to be key. It's going to be vital to them having success in the future. And so we're going to introduce this topic of mindset, and then once we discuss a little bit about mindset, we're actually going to introduce a couple other topics like the business phases and the business cycles, and then we're also going to talk about different types of income and then even recognizing opportunities. And the reason we kind of put all these things together in one place is that understanding that mindset will also help us understand what that mindset's going to look like in different business cycles, in different opportunity recognition exercises, and even in the type of income that we're looking to make. The mindset will be key and important to what an entrepreneur is going to do moving forward. So let's jump in and we'll start with mindset. So like I mentioned before, really introducing this idea of mindset is key to how successful an entrepreneur can be or is going to be. And again, like I mentioned, the way that an entrepreneur looks at the world, the way they look at opportunities, is going to be key to their success. And there's different types of entrepreneurs, certainly, and not all entrepreneurs are going to have the same mindset, and that's okay. But it is important to understand that our mindset will be key to the amount of success that we can derive in the future. And so it's important we nail down what that looks like right now and what we can do to have the right mindset moving forward as an entrepreneur. Okay, apologies for my videos covering that pessimistic word just a little bit on the graph, but know that that says pessimistic. So we have optimistic on top, pessimistic on the bottom, undefined, and defined. Peter Thiel, he used this quadrant in a book that he wrote about entrepreneurship, and essentially explained that this described the way that entrepreneurs and societies look at the world. We can be either optimistic or pessimistic. We can be undefined or defined. And he uses this quadrant to basically put a dot in that quadrant where an individual might fit or a society might fit. And I think he provides a lot of interesting research related to this topic of mindset, especially as it relates to societies. And on this next slide, I'm going to show you actually some research that was done and different societies and the way they look at the future or their outlook on life and how it's different and how that changes their behavior a little bit. And then we'll tie this into entrepreneurship and help you understand why it's important we understand the mindset an entrepreneur should have moving forward. Okay, let's first talk about this idea of having a defined perspective, a defined outlook on the future. Really what that means is just what the word describes. You feel like you have a pretty decent idea of what's going to happen in the world and what's going to happen in the future. And because you have a pretty good idea of that, you feel like you can actually plan for the future. You can make plans that will put you in a place that will provide you with the stability or the success or the things that you need in the future. And so this is this predictable nature of the world. And if you're defined, you feel like, hey, I know what's going to happen and I can kind of see the writing on the wall and I can see my path moving forward, you're probably more of a defined person or a defined entrepreneur. And so that's this idea of having this defined perspective. Okay, now we move on to undefined, and it's just the opposite of what we said before. Rather than feeling like you know what's going to happen, you feel like the future is very confusing. It's chaotic. You have no idea what the future is going to look like, and it's as if every step that you take is just a step into the dark. You don't know if you're going to be alive or dead or healthy or sick or happy or sad. Everything's chaotic. There's no direction, and you feel like you are lost in the smog and the fog of the craziness of the world. Okay, so that's this idea of being defined in your perspective versus undefined, which again is relatively straightforward. But I want to make sure we nail those down so that when we talk about where our mindset fits in that space, in that quadrant, we understand exactly what that means. Okay, now let's talk about this idea of optimism versus pessimism. And this is probably a whole nother life lesson we could go off on a tangent about, because I think optimism is great. I think it's important, and I'm definitely not always an optimist, but if we can have more of that mentality in our world today, I think it would probably help us as a society as a whole. And again, that's just me on the soapbox a little bit, talking about really just what kind of attitude we should have as people, right? But optimism, like we know, you think good things are going to happen. You're excited, you're happy, and you're just optimistic about the future. You think good things are to come. Whereas the pessimistic view, you think everything's going to get worse, things are going to be bad, and they're going to be worse than they are right now. And so we kind of have this doomsday mentality to a certain degree. And obviously, like I said, even with defined and undefined, or optimistic and pessimistic, there's going to be varying degrees of this perception. So just because you say, hey, I'm pessimistic, doesn't mean you're, oh, doomsday, everything's bad, nothing good is going to happen. It's a bit of a scale, right? And so you may float up and down that scale over time between these different quadrants, and that's okay. You're going to have certain life experiences that are going to change your outlook and your perspective on the future and on what you can do as a person and the things that will happen to you. So that's defined, undefined, optimistic, pessimistic. And again, they fit on that quadrant that I showed you in the very beginning. And now on this next slide, I think you'll see this is pretty interesting. I'm going to show you the difference between two regions, two different places in the world, and how their viewpoints are different. And again, this is research pulled from Peter Thiel's book. And so I'm not bringing up these regions for any specific purpose, but to reference some of the research that was done in his book so that we can kind of see how these mindsets fit in different societies. Okay, as you can see in this slide, we take a U.S. example and a China example. And in the U.S., we're optimistic and we're undefined. But we also have the lowest savings rate, I think when he wrote this book, of any country at the time. Any country with a certain threshold of GDP, certain threshold of annual income. Obviously, there's there's parameters for that statistic. And then in China, they're pessimistic and undefined, and they have the highest savings rate, again, in these batch of countries that fit in this demographic. So, is it great that we're in the U.S., we're optimistic? I think it's great. I think that's good. But we probably could have a little more pessimism, and we could probably be maybe a little more defined about the way we perceive things happening in the future. And then vice versa with China or whatever other country you want to talk about as far as the research goes. So just interesting to show that the way that we perceive the future, the way our mindset is, it's going to change the behavior of us as human beings and us as entrepreneurs, certainly. Like you can see here in the U.S., we really don't save very well because of our perspective on the future. And then in China, they're really good savers, and they're doing really good job preparing themselves for future unknown and for perhaps bad things that may happen because of that kind of viewpoint that they have. And again, I'm not saying one is good, one is bad. They're both good in their own right and for different reasons, and they probably both could use some additional perspective, right, that may be beneficial or helpful to them. So just a quick example of even a region of the world and how different regions look at the world and the way they perceive the world and how it changes their behavior. Because we're going to see this same thing with entrepreneurs. Depending on how we look at the world and how we look at entrepreneurship, it's going to change the way we behave and even the success that we may potentially be able to have in the future. Okay, now let's look at entrepreneurs and their actual mindset. Now, in the slide here, you can see that I say entrepreneurs are optimistic and defined. Now, is that an end-all, be-all? Is that an absolute answer? No, it's certainly not. And so if you don't feel like you're optimistic and you're defined by nature, that's totally okay. This goes back to our first lecture, that you can have different perspectives, different personalities, different mindsets, and still achieve great success and do lots of good in the world as an entrepreneur. But typically, if we're going to take the batch and group them into a majority, typically entrepreneurs are optimistic and defined. Now, why is that good for entrepreneurs? Well, the optimism, obviously, they feel like there's opportunities. They feel like there's ways to make money in the future. They feel like there's going to be good things coming down the road that they can take advantage of, that they can seize opportunities for, and then be able to make money, do good, serve people. And so that optimism, I think, does help in entrepreneurship in the fact that it gives you a greater ability to recognize and see opportunity because you have optimism about what's going to happen in the future. And it also helps you to kind of shoot for the stars, right? Because if you were really pessimistic about the future, you may not take risk or look for opportunity the same way you would if you were an optimist, okay? And then defined, obviously, the entrepreneur feels like they have a general idea about the future and they like where it's going and they think that they can take advantage of opportunity and things coming down the road, again, kind of like our optimism. But the whole defined aspect of it is that entrepreneurs, although really the world is not very easily defined, entrepreneurs feel like they can probably spot trends and see certain behavior happen over time that may be repeatable in the future. And so they feel like there's some definition to the way they perceive the world and the way they look at it. So this idea of optimistic and defined, that's typically what a typical entrepreneur, that's the kind of mindset that they would have, which provides them with a better ability to recognize opportunity, to believe that they can achieve success in the future because they think they can kind of be predictive that way, and just have success. And so that's this idea of optimistic and defined as an entrepreneur. Again, you could fit anywhere in that spectrum, and it's still okay. You can still be a great entrepreneur, but there is some sliding scale to that. And so if you don't fit perfectly in that, be okay with sliding a little bit one way or the other so that you can achieve the best results, you can be your best self, and hopefully find great opportunities in the future as an entrepreneur. Okay, now we're going to shift gears just a little bit. But again, like I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, the mindset has very much to do with all the rest of the things we talk about in this lecture. But I do want to introduce these topics so that we can start to get our feet wet with other things beyond who an entrepreneur is and what their mindset looks like, but some of the actual distinct principles and concepts related to entrepreneurship. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the business life cycles. Okay? And we're going to talk about 4 distinct phases, 4 distinct cycles that happen in a business typically. Now, I should say before we jump in that not all businesses are going to make it through all 4 of these cycles, or maybe not even all 3, or maybe not even the first 2. And so businesses drop off or persevere through different parts of these phases, okay? And so don't think that every business has to go through every phase, because they don't. Not all businesses do that. So just keep that in mind as we start to move through these business life cycles. And also in the back of your mind, this idea of mindset and the way an entrepreneur is going to look at the world and how it might affect the way that they treat these different business phases, okay? So first one we're going to look at is the pre-launch phase, the pre-launch cycle. This is essentially where, as an entrepreneur, you're recognizing opportunity and you're starting to gather resources to pursue that opportunity. You might be working by yourself, you might be working with a co-founder, maybe you're working with a group of people. It could be a variety of different formats, but this is really kind of those beginning stages where you're starting to recognize an opportunity and start to prepare yourself to go after that opportunity. You're doing research in the market, you're seeing what the competitors are, what they're selling, how they're marketing, all those things. You're starting to do some of your preliminary research to understand, okay, can we jump into this space? Can we be successful in this space? And is this opportunity worth actually pursuing and putting our resources into? Okay, so that's this pre-launch phase. And in my opinion, probably the funnest phase of any of them is the pre-launch, because you're enthralled with the opportunity and the chance you have to go out and start something new and have success in that new thing. And so this pre-launch phase is really important, obviously, because this is where great ideas are picked up or put down, and you need to make sure you're doing your due diligence and your research and understanding if these opportunities are actually worth pursuing. Okay, now we're going to move on to phase 2 of this business life cycle, and this is the startup phase. Okay, this is where you've taken everything you've done in the pre-launch phase and you're going out and actually doing it now. You're putting the rubber to the road and you're actually going for it. Okay, this could be hiring people, this could be bringing in your first customers. Usually smaller operations are happening during this time, And you as the entrepreneur, or you and your co-founders, you're the ones usually doing all the work in this phase. The startup phase is very much grind it out. You're putting a lot of work in, a lot of time, and exerting a lot of effort to pursue this opportunity. But you are actually a business, right? You're running something. You're actually selling to customers, even if it's your first few. You're starting to sell to people, and even maybe starting to build a team around you. And so this is the startup phase, which again, critically important to the success of a business into the future, because a lot of times people get in the startup phase and they push really hard and maybe make a mistake, or they burn out, or whatever it is, and it doesn't make it past this startup phase, right? People may think they're past the startup phase, but in reality they kind of get stuck in the space, in that phase, and they can't break out of it to real growth. And so the startup phase is really key, really important, but this is where taking action is going to be vital as an entrepreneur. And you'll hear me talk about this more and more throughout the remaining lectures, that taking action is certainly the most important, if not the one of the most important, if not the most important things you can do as an entrepreneur. Because if you're not taking action, then it's almost impossible to know if an opportunity is going to work, or if a new business is going to work, or if you can actually have success if you're not going out and doing. And this startup phase is just that. Rubber meets the road, you're going out and doing, you're pounding the pavement, knocking doors, doing your thing, trying to see if this opportunity can really scale and grow. So that's the startup phase, and again, critically important to what you're doing in building a business. Okay, now we're on to phase 3, which is the growth phase. And you can see here, this is really where the business is really starting to expand, really starting to grow in size, in employees, in revenue, all those things. You're obviously increasing your client base, otherwise you wouldn't be growing the way you want to. And usually the entrepreneur who started the company has settled into some sort of executive position. Their CFO, their CEO, their CTO, there's something like that that allows them to make the big decisions inside of the business while letting the business itself operate with the team and the people that you've built around you, okay? And obviously this is another really exciting phase in the business cycle, because this is where you start to see lots more money, lots more people being brought on, lots more attention to your brand and to your business. And this is a different kind of approach as an entrepreneur in this growth stage than you probably took when you first started, or even in that startup or pre-launch phase. Very different type of growth that's happening here, which usually means that as an entrepreneur, you've changed your role a little bit. You've changed the way that you've tried to grow the business. Maybe you're using different tactics now, and because it's a bigger cog, it's a bigger business, and harder to be nimble and agile with, you've had to put in a certain set of hierarchies that allow you to manage that number of people and to grow the business in a successful yet safe and healthy rate. And so this growth phase, obviously awesome, incredible. You can make lots of money here and do lots of good things, but it is certainly different than those first 2 phases, but still an opportunity here to really let your business turn into something big and significant, the way you always probably dreamed it to be. Okay, we are in the final phase of our business life cycle. This is the maturity and sometimes even potential decline phase of your business. Now, what do I mean by that? Usually when you're in this phase, you're in multiple countries or cities, or however geographically large you are. Your growth rate has probably started to slow down a little bit. You see the big hockey stick curve there. Yeah, you did that for a while, and you're probably starting to level off now. You're starting to plateau a little bit. And sometimes you even decrease a little bit. Sometimes you even decline a bit. And that's where it's really important with the people that you've put in place inside of your business, because now as the entrepreneur, you're probably stepping away from the business and letting it operate and run, and you continue to reap the benefits and the revenue from that. But really, this is important that you put the right people in place so that when it's time to pivot, when it's time to change, when that potential decline happens, you can do it in a way that's going to keep your business innovative and growing and continuing to expand to a certain degree. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to have the same kind of rocket launcher growth you did when you first started, and that's okay. But when you become a big, large, well-established business, there's still pivoting and still changes that have to happen all the time so that you're staying on top of the curve, okay? I always tell people, a great example of this is Blockbuster, right? probably many of my students now are starting to not even know what Blockbuster was because it's been gone long enough now that maybe it's not in the news, you don't read about it, didn't ever experience it as a kid. But Blockbuster was a perfect example of this, where they were ramping, they were growing, and they were a really well-established business in the space, in the video rental space, entertainment space. But when Netflix came around, they took too long to pivot. They took too long to change and to innovate in a way that would allow them to keep up with or stay ahead of the likes of Netflix, where they started to ship DVDs to you, and then they ultimately started streaming content to you. Now they're making a bunch of their own original content, all those things, right? Blockbuster just wasn't on the cutting edge of that kind of industry, that business, even though they were supposed to be the biggest and be most established in that space as far as video entertainment. So it's really, really important who you put around you, what executives you put in place to help lead and guide the business. And if you want to hear more about the Blockbuster Netflix feud, there's a really good podcast that I always tell my students about. It's called Business Wars. It's by a company called Wondery, and I think there's a couple different Netflix versus Blockbuster episodes, and really interesting to listen to the story and listen to the interaction between those companies and how Netflix began to grow and eventually outpace Blockbuster, so much so that Blockbuster ultimately went bankrupt, right? So that's an interesting listen if you ever want to listen to a fun podcast. And Business Wars has all kinds of fun competitive business niches where they discuss that, from cereal wars to motorcycles to Netflix Blockbuster to a million other different kinds of businesses. And they're really fun to listen to, very entertaining. So that's the maturity and potential decline phase. Again, this is usually where entrepreneurs have kind of stepped out. They're not really doing as much in this phase typically because they've put a team in place and they're letting the business grow and reaping benefits, rewards, revenue from them. So that's maturity and potential decline. Okay, like I mentioned in the previous slide, entrepreneurs are really crucial in stages 1, 2, and they're important in 3. And then in 4, I say they're obsolete. They're not always obsolete. Sometimes there's founders that stick with the business and end up running it for a long time and do a really great job. But in a general way of speaking, in stage 4, they're really not interacting. They're not involved as much. And I actually think that's good, especially if being an entrepreneur and starting something new is kind of your favorite thing about entrepreneurship. In my personal opinion, the funnest stages are 1 and 2. 3 is still great, but 4, you lose kind of the excitement and the fun that comes with creating something new, with building a business, because it turns into more of mechanical operation of a big giant entity with lots of people and lots of red tape, etc. So, So the entrepreneurs are crucial in those stages. Important in 3, usually obsolete in 4, and that's okay. I think that's a good thing, especially if serial entrepreneurship is your thing, where you want to start something new all the time, and maybe you get tired with sticking with the same thing forever. And so that's what I really like about it. Nice thing about that too is you can go and start something new. You can grow it by yourself. You can bring in team members that you've worked with in the past. And again, not all businesses will make it through every cycle. And so even as an entrepreneur, if you've created a really successful business and it made it through those 4 business cycles, those phases, and then maybe you start something new and you get to the startup phase and it tanks, right? That could happen too, and that's okay. That's a great education, great learning experience for you, even if you've had success in the past, to continue to fine-tune and sharpen your skills and the way that you analyze opportunities and the way you build business. So know that all those phases are key. They are very important, but not all phases are for the quote-unquote general entrepreneur. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we move through these. Okay, let's talk about different types of income. And again, I know we're jumping around to a bunch of different things. We went from mindset to business cycle, and now we're talking about different types of income. And again, this all relates back to mindset as an entrepreneur, because depending on if you're optimistic or defined or undefined or pessimistic, you may approach a business in a different way, because maybe you want active income, or maybe you want passive income, or maybe you want something in between. And so it's important to understand that all these things tie back. Active income, let's talk about that first. So really this is you showing up and doing something to earn that money. if I'm going to go work at McDonald's, for example, then I need to show up and I need to flip the burgers and I need to do the thing to get paid my money, right? I have to show up and actively be involved in building that or doing that. And it doesn't have to be a job like McDonald's. It could be a physician, for example. I have two physicians, two doctors in my family, a dad and a brother. And for them, they have to actively show up and be seeing patients and treating patients to earn an income, okay? At least with that particular part of their income earning, okay? And so that's active income. That's you showing up 9 to 5, being there, doing something actively to earn that income. Now, how's that different from passive income? Passive income, you're going to make the money regardless of what you actually do. Now, I say that with a caveat that passive income still requires work, and I don't think there's really ever anything that's absolutely passive in nature. But passive income is this idea that you come in and you do the work initially, you build something out, you build a system out or a business out, and then in the future, you can step away and continue to collect income passively without being day-to-day actively involved in the business or in whatever it is you've created, okay? And so examples of passive income you can see here that I listed. Investing in stocks could be a form of passive income, right? Because you go and maybe do some research, you study, and you think, hey, I'm going to put my money with this stock, with this business, and then over time it can pay you dividends, or maybe as price increases, you sell portions and you make money that way, etc. Now, this could be, some people even call like real estate, rental properties passive, right? You have to do work and you have to do things initially to create money to buy the property, and maybe you have to fix it up and maybe you have to do a variety of different things to it. But over time, it's going to become more passive in nature, especially if you turn it over to a property management company, for example, where you're not actively involved collecting that money or earning that money. This could be things like creating a course online. It could be like writing a book, for example, right? You write it one time and you sell it forever. Things like that are what I'm talking about when we say passive income. And obviously, as an entrepreneur, typically you're looking at how do I create more passive income in my life? Because the passive income is the thing that allows you to free up more of your time. And again, in my opinion, time is the most valuable asset you have. And so pursuing that passive income is vitally important so that you can continue to make the kind of money that you want and allow yourself to have the time to do other things, other ventures, spend time with family, whatever it is that's important to you. Okay, so active income, passive income, know the differences between those. I always ask a test question on that. So know the differences between those different types of income. Okay, I mentioned this previously in the last slide, but we'll cover this just a little bit just to drive it home. Obviously, entrepreneurs want to build something that provides passive income typically, unless you like, as a doctor, maybe being a doctor is your thing, it's your calling, and you love it, and you love being with people every day and serving them every day. And by all means, do that. Be actively earning your income. That's great. But I still think for anybody, even if they like their active income role, I think for anybody it's smart to pursue or look for passive income opportunities that you can benefit from in the future without having to be there day to day, right? Now, as entrepreneurs, we want a really high ratio of passive to active income, okay? So I mentioned dad and brother, for example. They make a really good living as doctors. They do really, really well, but their ratio, at least at some point in time in their lives, and they're doing much better now, but at some point in time in their lives, the active income was much, much higher than passive income. Now, they've created lots of opportunities with the funds that they make to create more passive income opportunities, but know that when you go into that as an entrepreneur, even as somebody that's working a regular job and you're looking to invest or do those things, the goal is how do we make the passive income greater than our active income? And when you keep that in your mind as you build businesses and you look for opportunities, you'll have the right kind of mindset as far as, okay, this thing could make me a lot of money, but it's going to require a lot of my active time. Okay, so maybe that's not an opportunity you pursue. So keep that in mind as you recognize opportunities and you look for those things. And when we finish up this income discussion, we'll talk a little bit about recognizing opportunities. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple more kinds of income, and really they both can fit kind of under the passive or active income, but they're different types, different branches of that, and I think they're important to understand as we discuss entrepreneurship. First one, recurring revenue. So what is that? Instead of selling something one time to somebody, you can sell it to them over and over and over and over and over again, right? And so that way the clients repeatedly pay you as long as they're using that thing or as long as they're a member of this group or whatever it might be. So think subscription packages, right? So any of you that know Dollar Shave Club, for example, that was a subscription-based model that when they originally created it, where you can pay a monthly fee to receive razors and shaving gel and all that stuff every single month. You're paying a monthly fee for that. You can also think of things like software, SaaS, software as a service, where you subscribe to a certain software and you're paying a monthly fee to continue to have access to that software, to continue to use the software. That's why a lot of people love the SaaS model, is because they can come in and they can build something out initially, and obviously there's maintenance and there's things that go along with that over time, but it becomes relatively passive, and the recurring revenue is really enticing because you can be predictive about the kind of money you're going to make month to month, because you know we have, for example, 100 subscribers subscribing to our software and they're paying $100 a month. So it's easy to start to calculate what that kind of money will look like and then deduct expenses and other things to be predictive about what your business will do, okay? So that's one type of revenue that kind of falls under these different types of income. That's really important, really enticing, and becoming very, very popular in today's world. And if it were me, I would find businesses that have this kind of revenue, recurring revenue. Okay, let's talk about planned obsolescence. And maybe you've heard of that, maybe you haven't. But planned obsolescence is this idea that products or services are designed to break or to stop working at some point. Now, you think to yourself, why would a company build a product that's planned to break eventually? Well, just like the last slide we talked about, they want recurring revenue. They don't want you to buy something from them one time and then never buy from them again. They want you to continue to come back buying over and over and over again. So this idea of planned obsolescence is really important for a lot of businesses. Think Apple, okay? Apple takes an iPhone and they say, hey, here's iPhone 1 and 2 and 3 and 3S and 5E and whatever they name them, right? They have planned obsolescence, meaning the phone won't perform as well, the software doesn't work with an old phone, or whatever they do, the battery life is not as good, right? We've seen that in the news. They have planned obsolescence so that it almost forces the consumer to have to upgrade at some point and continue to buy back from them, because the obsolescence is so significant that we can't operate in the way that we want to or the way that we need to, okay? So again, this idea of planned obsolescence, making sure that a product will break eventually or not work eventually or stop eventually, helps companies be more predictive in their revenue models and helps them understand that customers will come back even if we're dealing with products that are longer term use or you hold on to it for years or months or whatever, okay? So this is really important, especially for businesses that don't have a recurring revenue model where you're paying monthly for some subscription, something. It's important for them to try to implement this. Now, it doesn't always make consumers happy, and maybe you don't like hearing this, but it is something that happens in our world. So you just need to be familiar with it. Okay, let's talk about opportunity recognition. Okay. When we recognize opportunities, there's different parts of that, different ways that we can do that. And the first thing, obviously, you have to do is just being able to recognize that there is an opportunity in front of you. And how do we do that? Maybe you see there's a certain problem that you deal with on a regular basis. And maybe there's an opportunity to add a solution or a benefit in that way. A lot of times I tell people, hey, if you're going to recognize an opportunity, just think to yourself, what are your pain points every day? What things drive you crazy that you wish there was a better solution to? That's a great opportunity, probably, because there's most likely lots of other people that are having your same experience. And so you just have to figure out how to come up with a solution that's going to help them solve that everyday problem, okay? And it doesn't always have to be in your own life. Maybe you work at a certain place and you see in your workplace an opportunity or a problem that hasn't been solved or fixed. And so that's an opportunity and one that you could recognize that if you add a benefit or a solution to that, could be a chance for you to build a business. One of our speaker series that came, who's also part of SU's Entrepreneur Leadership Council, an incredible entrepreneur in his own right. His name's Dennis Sponer, and he worked as an attorney in-house for a medical insurance company. Now, when he worked with a medical insurance company, one of the things they did a lot was transacted with pharmacies. And back in the day, and this is years ago, they had to send hard copy letters to the pharmacy, and then the pharmacy had to approve, or vice versa. Pharmacy had to send letter to insurance company had to approve, and then send letter back, and then approve drugs or whatever it was, and then there was snail mail transactions as far as reimbursing each other, etc. And it was a really slow, arduous, just difficult process. And so Dennis, being an attorney there and seeing these issues and the things that came up in his own daily work, realized that there was a real opportunity here to make some money, to create a solution that would allow him to create a business around. And lo and behold, they create a software, an opportunity to solve that problem for a lot of people. They grow it exponentially, and he ends up selling it a few years ago for lots of millions of dollars. And so he did really well in recognizing the opportunity and then just pursuing that, okay? So number 2 is conceptualization. You realize there's an opportunity and you research markets and validate the idea. Now, was it as hard for Dennis to conceptualize and validate it? No, because he saw in real time, in his real work, that this was an issue. People were talking about it all the time, did all these things, and then when he needed to conceptualize it, they said, hey, what if I came up with this solution? Would this work well for you? Would you buy it? Would you pay for this solution? And it's easy for him to be able to validate that idea. And you can do the same thing in your own opportunity. Whether it's asking people in your workspace, whether it's asking friends and family, whether it's polling people at school, or whatever it is, there's ways to validate your idea. And we're going to talk a lot more about validation later on in the lectures. But this is a really important process too. Recognizing and then conceptualizing through researching the market and then validating that idea or that opportunity you think you're going to pursue. Okay, finally, this is our last slide. Okay, now this is our last 2 steps of this process of opportunity recognition. Number 3 is planning. So we recognized the opportunity, we conceptualized it, we validated it during that process. In the planning part, we're gathering our resources, we're figuring out how to actually tackle the opportunity, to actually do something about it, and we're thinking about the business model we're going to use to actually do that. And so a lot of this is saying, okay, we know there's validation, we know people want to have this solution. How do we actually do that? And what resources do we need to have to actually go out and accomplish this thing? Okay. And then number 4, launching the business. This is really just, again, going back to the action. You go out and try the idea. You go out and try the opportunity. And really this is key to you finding success as an entrepreneur. Yeah, all the first 3 steps are important, recognizing opportunity, doing all those things. But I almost think you kind of, you move through those phases swiftly with the purpose that I need to get to 4 so that I can actually try this thing. Okay. Now, obviously, you got to do your due diligence in the other phases, the other steps, because that will be key to you actually having success in the future. But if you can get to the action part as quickly as you can, that's where you're really going to reap what you sow. That's really where you're going to find out, is this opportunity going to catch on, going to make money, going to serve people in a really good way? It's all about taking the action, because if you're not taking the action, you'll never know if it's going to work. You'll never know if you're going to be successful as an entrepreneur. You're never going to know if people are going to pay you money for it, etc. So you've got to get to the action part. It's absolutely vital to what you do as an entrepreneur. So those are our 4 steps of recognizing the opportunity. And then in conclusion, again, we went from mindset to what are our business phases, to what types of income can we produce, to how do we recognize opportunities. And all those relate back to the mentality, the mindset that we have as an entrepreneur and the way we look at the world. So keep those in mind as you consider the topics we've covered in Lecture 2. Now, if you're doing the lectures first and then business challenge portion second, make sure you go through the business challenge portion. That lecture is kind of a lecture in and of itself, and this is the part where you can actually apply principles and put them into action. Okay, so make sure you cover both of those, and obviously the speaker series, watch that, do the reflection, do the write-up on it, and should be good. Thanks for sitting with me through Lecture 2. We will chat again soon.